Okay, thanks Alex. So we're going to take a look at some improvements at pattern level now. So if we just switch through to SolidWorks, we're going to look at this sort of stock rail that's available off the shelf here first. And you'll all be familiar with the ability to obviously change the size of an item like this, and if we rebuild it, you would have probably seen this before where a feature will fail because it's the number of instances within the pattern are not cutting the body. Now, in previous releases, what we could do here is build equations into the system that would automatically adjust the number of instances within the pattern to make that work a little bit better. But in 2015, that whole process has been streamlined quite a lot more. So if we just go into this pattern here, it sort of reinforces why the pattern fails. You'll see the number of instances is actually well in excess of what we need here, and they're not cutting the model. The new options we see for 2015 are this up to reference box here. So if I toggle on up to reference, I can then choose a reference from my model, and you'll see that the count of instances automatically updates to reflect how many it can fit at the designated spacing here of 60mm between the 2 points. We can also choose to optionally add an offset distance in as well, and with the equation functionality we can build a very simple equation in there to maintain the same offset at both ends. Now what we'll find with this new pattern option is that if we start to extend the length of this, you'll see that the number of instances increases and we get a much more predictable behaviour within our pattern. Another option within the same tool is to use a number of instances as opposed to a set spacing between them. So here we could say that we want 12 instances, and if we just adjust the length of this again, you'll see the spacing between those 12 instances updates to suit based on the overall length. So some nice functionality improvements within the linear pattern tool there. So if we just take a look at another example, we've got a saw blade here. Now the tooth component here, which is patterned, has actually been created as a feature which has been merged with the original body. And what we find with that type of behaviour is that's fine, but we're not going to get an accurate listing of these teeth within our cutting list, which is maybe something that we want to do. So a small edit that we can make is to edit that feature and toggle off the merge results option. So we've now created a separate body within our file. Now what we find is that the pattern will fail because we originally created the pattern and chose a feature to create it with, and we've now changed the scope of that to be a body. In previous releases of SolidWorks there wasn't much that we could do about that. We'd have to delete the pattern and recreate it. But in 2015 we can go into the pattern feature and we can change the scope of what's included within the pattern. So here I can clear the feature that I was patterning and choose to pattern a body instead. All the same, numerical values are still retained within that tool, so I can just click OK, and we've now got an accurate cutting list with those bodies listed for us. So more of a limitation that's been addressed, but it's a nice functionality improvement in the software anyway. So we'll take a look at another example now. So if we go over to this sheet metal part, we've got a pattern that's been created with the fill pattern tool shown just down here. And if we go into the fill pattern tool, what we see that's new is this count box towards the bottom. So we're now going to get the system to generate a number of instance values for us, which is really nice. So it's something we didn't have before, and in previous releases what we may have needed to do there is create a drawing of this component and produce a whole table in there, which wasn't a lengthy process, but it's just something extra that we had to do. So within here now, if we change any of the dimensional information, we can then revalidate the count of the pattern, and that should update and double check that we've got that right number of instances in there. Now that count will display as a driven value on the model when we select the feature like so. So it being driven, we can't change it, but it will update if we do decide to make changes to the pattern. So for example here I could choose to delete a pattern instance directly from the graphics area, and we'll see that that value updates to reflect the changes that we've made. If we switch over to our drawing, what we can see is that dimensional value can be displayed on the drawing just by using insert model items. It can then be parametrically linked to notes, so we can get an accurate listing there of the quantity of holes for manufacture. So a real welcome improvement to the fill pattern tool. So we've seen some nice improvements to the existing pattern tools that we've got, but the next thing I want to talk about is a brand new pattern tool called Variable Pattern. So it's available from the pattern drop down here, and it just allows us to create much more complicated patterns that may have required multiple features in previous releases. We can now do that within one pattern feature. So here we've got a slot on screen, and we're using a variable pattern to create everything selected in blue. So I'm just going to suppress that pattern and we'll create it again. So if we just take a look in here, we've got a slot on screen that's position is controlled by some dimensions. So it's 10 mil away from the origin, it's 40 mil long, and it has an angular dimension here controlling its orientation. What I'd like to do is create a number of instances around the outside. Every other one is slightly shorter and they're all rotated, so we get 20 of those on screen. So if I start the variable pattern tool, I can choose which features I want to pattern. So I want to pattern this slot, and if there was any positional sketches or reference geometry to drive that seed, I can include that in there as well. But for this example, we only want to pattern the slot. So I can then create a pattern table, and this table then allows me to choose dimensional values that I want to change. So here we're going to alter the angle, the offset and the length of that slot. So you'll see it pulls in the default values for there in this table. I'm just going to add another instance to my table here, and we want 20 of these, so we're just going to use a little bit of simple maths here to divide that. And I did say that I want every other value to be 25 offset and 25 long. So we'll just key in those values like so. I can now choose to add a number of additional rows into my pattern table, so I'm going to add 18 more. And it works very much like Excel, so if we window select those top two, it's automatically going to create a list for us of those values. And again, copy and paste will work within here as well. So if I select those rows and copy, and then if we paste, we should get these populating down like so. So we'll just fill in the rest of these values, making sure we get them all in the right place, and we'll just fill in the final ones here manually just to ensure that they're correct. Once we've filled in our table values, we can use a handy update preview button here to get an understanding of whether we've got all of those correct, and that looks reasonable. We've missed a couple of numbers there, but not to worry, it gives us a flavour for what the tool does there. And we can say OK and come out of the tool and then click the green tick, and we get the generation of the pattern that we wanted. So a really nice sort of addition to the tool set there. Another example in this file set is the holes. So the holes have been created with a PCD value and a number of instances, and they also have a rotational reference here as well. The variable pattern for these holes is just allowing us to alter the PCD, the number of instances and the rotational angle, giving us a nice set of drainage holes in this colander. Okay, if we just take a look at some more complicated examples, we've got a shoe sole here, and you'll see that there's a reasonably curvy surface on here, and these spikes are actually patterned using the variable pattern. Now the position of these spikes is controlled by a 3D sketch, and then there's a plane normal to the face, this curved face here. So within the variable pattern, I mentioned earlier that we can use positional references like a 3D sketch and a plane within here as well. And you'll see within the tool we're patterning the spike feature, the serrations on the top, and the fillet that includes it to the main body. So if we take a look at the table here, you'll see the X and Y position of that sketch are controlled, the rotational angle of the spike is controlled and its length as well. Now we can change the values for X and Y locations within that pattern table, but what you may find is with the more complicated examples it's sometimes a little bit easier to actually do them graphically on screen. So here I can pick an instance and it will show me the dimensional constraints that are being used on it. So I could update this to 150 here for example and rebuild it, and I'm only changing that one instance, and it's much easier for me to visually see the change that I'm making and ensuring that's correct. Another example of where the variable pattern can really help is this shoe sole here. So if we just take a look, we've got the definition and position of splines being controlled by the pattern table. So it's not limited to 3D sketches, we can actually use a 2D sketch and control the values within here. But also within this particular example there's some control over the depth of each of the cuts as well, so we can get some really complicated examples with this tool. Okay, so just in summary, we've seen the linear pattern improvements with the up to reference option, the ability to edit the pattern content type from feature to face or body. We've also seen the fill count values within the fill pattern tool, and the new tool for 2015, the variable table pattern. We'll switch over to Alex now, who's going to run us through some assembly mates.